of the story? Well, as I've heard several times so far this morning, it is February 14th. So we'll think about romance this morning. The story of Ruth's Bethlehem resurrection will just have to wait a couple more weeks. Everybody okay with that? All right. I remember years ago, as if it were yesterday, on Valentine's Day, coming home to discover a box had been delivered to our home. It was lying outside the front door from proflowers.com. Knowing I had not placed the order for that box, but belatedly wishing that I had, I picked it up to find out who else might be sending flowers to my wife. I learned, to my amusement, the box was addressed not to my wife, but to one of my daughters. It was instantly clear that some boy was pursuing my girl, hoping to win her attention, her affection, maybe her heart. My first thought was to destroy the box and its contents before she saw it, but I had to admit, it was a nice gesture. It was romantic. And whoever it was, I thought, he's got very good taste in who he's pursuing. It's nice to be loved, isn't it? To be pursued in the very best sense of the word. Valentine's Day is kind of an interesting holiday. Did you know, for instance, that Valentine's Day is the second biggest card-sending holiday of the year, just behind Christmas? Did you know that twice as many cards to women are sent than to men? That's the stat. Men send twice as many as women. I don't know if that means twice as many men send cards as women, or that they tend to send multiple cards, or that men tend to send cards to multiple women. But us guys spend twice as much. Did you know that Valentine's Day is probably named after two different men, each named Valentine, both of whom were martyred for their Christian faith sometime in the 3rd century? And so, Valentine's Day, the day that most people associate with love, is really a day about death. The romantic attachment came about in about the mid-1300s, when the poet Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a poem about two lovebirds to celebrate the first wedding anniversary of King Richard II and Anne of Bohemia, which we assume just happened to be on, you guessed it, February 14th. And the romantic part stuck, because people just seem to prefer romance over death. At least that's what Google AI says, which has got to be true, because AI is the greatest thing ever, and it never makes mistakes. Whether it's actually true or not, who knows? But one thing is true. People love stories, especially romantic ones. So this morning we're going to think about some romantic stories. But first, let's consider stories in general. Here's a book recommendation for you for this morning. I often give you a recommendation. Here's one that you ought to read. It's called The Sacred Romance by a guy named John Eldredge. If you haven't read it, you owe yourself this treat. It's wonderful. The Sacred Romance. In this book, Eldredge writes about the value of stories, and we all understand this intuitively. But here's what he says, and it's in your bulletins this morning. He says, the deepest convictions of our hearts are formed by stories and reside there in the images and emotions of story. Life is not a list of propositions, it's a series of dramatic scenes. As Eugene Peterson said, we live in narrative. We live in story. Existence has a story to shape it. We have a beginning and an end. We have a plot. We have characters. Story, Eldridge says, is the language of the heart. Our souls speak not in the naked facts of mathematics or the abstract propositions of systematic theology. They speak the images and emotions of story. Contrast your enthusiasm for studying a textbook with the offer to go to a movie, read a novel, or listen to the stories of someone else's life. Elie Wiesel suggests that God created man because he loves stories. So if we're going to find the answer to the riddle of the earth and of our own existence, a riddle, he says, that we are constantly trying to solve, either consciously or unconsciously, we'll find it in story. Especially love stories, which we term romance. What's a romance? Here's what Webster says. A romance is a fictitious tale of wonderful and extraordinary events, or a type of novel in which the emphasis is on love and adventure. Well, if that's the case, then guess what's the single greatest romantic epic ever penned? What do you think? It's the Bible. Yeah. With this single caveat, it's not fiction. It's true. The epic story of a wonderfully good and powerful being and his romantic pursuit of people. People he carries on his heart. People whose hearts he longs to win. People who he loves and longs to be loved by. And that's us. G.K. Chesterton said, "Romance is the deepest thing in life, deeper even than reality." We think of Valentine's Day in terms of boyfriends and girlfriends, or a husband and a wife, somebody we love and who hopefully loves us in return, and that's good. The deeper meaning of the day is that we are pursued and wooed and loved by God himself. And the most amazing thing is this: he died to win us. He gave his life to win our affections, and so that we might know beyond every shadow of a doubt that we are loved. How amazing is that? God's Valentine to us is rooted in the death of the lover. It's the original Valentine. The question is, how will we respond? So let's think about the Valentine story that Greg just read to us. Contrary to what you might think, this is not primarily an evangelistic story. We tend to use it that way all the time, don't we? An evangelistic model. No, it's a love story, and the first hint is right there in the opening verse, verse 4. Now he, Jesus, had to go through Samaria. Here's the setting. It's fairly simple. Jesus is on his way from Judea to Galilee. It's a straight shot from the south, almost exactly due north, just a few degrees east, due north, through Samaria, with no deviation, just straight shot. But the Jews deviated all the time. Jews traveling from Judea to Galilee would go out of their way to avoid having to go through Samaria. They would journey an extra 20 miles to the east, cross the Jordan, then go north, cross the Jordan again, head back west, and then north to Galilee in order to avoid having to walk through despised Samaritan territory. I mean, Jews and Samaritans, they detested each other. You all know that. For centuries they had. But John said that Jesus had to go through Samaria. He couldn't take the detour. Why not? Was there a bridge out over the Jordan? Had the Palestinians set up some checkpoints that he wanted to miss? No. It was because of romance. This becomes clearer when you go to verses 5 and 6. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. Now you may be thinking, that doesn't sound very romantic to me. Hot and sweaty, tired and thirsty. Well, it never seemed romantic to me either all these times I've read it. And that's because we tend to see this story through an evangelistic lens, a template. We tend to understand it, read it to understand how Jesus interacts with this unbelieving woman so that we can emulate him, right? In other words, we read it for method, and that's okay, but there's more. What if we try to hear this story in a whole new way? What if this story started with these words? Once upon a time, in a land far, far away. Wait a minute, you say. That's not how it starts. But if it did start that way, you would know it to be a certain kind of story, wouldn't you? If it starts with once upon a time, in a land far, far away, you know what kind of a story is it? It's a fairy tale, right? A fantasy story. When you hear that opener, you're not anticipating a news story on the ice drawdown in Minnesota or whether the government will get funded by the weekend. You're being set up for a make-believe story. The words once upon a time are our tickets to the land of imagination. And when we hear those words, we expect some very specific things to happen in the story. This is what fantasy stories and fairy tales are all about. We expect some very good or courageous person, maybe a prince or a princess, to play a prominent role. We also expect to encounter something very bad, maybe a witch or a troll. And we expect there to be a contest between the forces of good and the forces of evil, with evil threatening the day until at the very last moment, when all seems to be lost, good emerges victorious through some heroic effort, right? And of course, we expect that the story will end with what words? And they all lived happily ever after. Yeah. These expectations are due to what we call story conventions, the skeleton framework upon which the fabric of the story is woven. Now remember, for most of the world's history, until just the last few hundred years really, most people were illiterate. They could neither read nor write. So using a skeleton structure upon which to fashion a story was an ancient method of storytelling that helped those who were telling the story to get it right. And it enabled the hearers to know what kind of a story to expect so that they could pay closer attention to the details they might otherwise miss. The people of Israel were used to stories being told in a particular manner so that they could hear them and retell them from generation to generation. Now we've got Kindles and iPads and flash memory cards. They didn't have those things. Jesus often taught people by telling stories. Many of his parables were based on stories people already knew. When he began to tell one, his listeners would immediately tune in. They knew what to expect. They knew what was coming, or at least they thought they knew what was coming. Oftentimes, Jesus would take some well-known story and twist it to make his point. The story of the rich man and Lazarus is a wonderful example of that. He didn't just make this stuff up from scratch. And whenever he'd talk about a king who maybe went on a journey, or servants, or a wedding, he was using a particular story type. Now, one of the stories, types of stories that was told in ancient Israel was the betrothal story. Stories of how their ancestors met and got married. They were very important stories that were passed down from generation to generation. And guess what? It's no different today. We like to hear the stories of how our parents met and married. Let me ask you a question. How many of you met your spouse on a blind date? Anybody? Nobody. My mom and dad met on a blind date, a setup. It was a cold, snowy, late January evening in Ohio. They had been set up by mutual friends. Dad arrived outside my mom's second floor apartment and pulled up to the curb. He was driving a brand new 1955 Ford Sunliner convertible, two-tone paint, red over white, with a black convertible top. Being January, of course, the top was not down. Otherwise, my mother, who was peeking through the curtains, would have looked out her window and thought, who in the world is that nut? And she would never have answered the doorbell. But as it was, she looked down. She saw a fine-looking man get out of this breathtakingly beautiful new car under the street lamp as the snow floated gently down, and he was carrying red roses. And she thought, wow, he's handsome, which he was, and he's rich, which he wasn't, because the car was the only thing of value he had, and it was mortgaged. But she didn't know that. And when the doorbell rang, she answered, and when she got in the car, she noticed an expensive box of chocolates in the back seat. But he never offered them to her because he was so smitten. And after the date was over, she figured she'd never hear from him again because obviously the chocolates were from some other girl he was dating. And she was sad because she'd had such a good time. So she was totally shocked the next morning before work, when the phone rang and she answered, and my dad asked to take her to dinner that night. And she said, "Who's the box of candy for?" And 3 weeks later, they eloped to Indiana and were married on February 21st, 1955, 1 week past Valentine's Day, 76 years ago, next Sabbath. I love that story. Every Valentine's Day growing up, Mom and Dad would tell that story. If they didn't offer, we'd demand it. And my brother and I would hang on every word just like we'd never heard that story before. Now, betrothal stories of the Bible, especially the stories of the patriarchs, had particular things in common. First of all, there would be a young man, not married, not dating anybody, the eligible bachelor, so to speak. Second, he or his representative might make a trip to a distant land. While on that trip, his agent or he would stop by a well to be refreshed. Next, a maiden would come to the well where the two of them would meet. There might be a discussion or some bonding event, after which the maiden would run and tell her family about the events at the well. The family would extend hospitality to the stranger, and eventually a wedding would be announced. This is the way Isaac became engaged to Rebekah. This is the way Jacob became engaged to Rachel. This is the way Moses became engaged to Zipporah. The story of Moses and Zipporah isn't a long story, but if you look carefully, all these elements are there. This was one of the common forms of a betrothal story. So let's just remember the story of Isaac and Rebekah for a moment to see how it works. And of course, this is a rerun for most of you, but we love it. And we watch the rom-coms multiple times, don't we? We just love them. It's in Genesis 24. Here's the first two elements: the eligible bachelor or his agent traveling to a distant land. Genesis 24:2. Abraham said to his chief steward, "Swear to me by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the Canaanites among whom I am living, but you will go to my country, to my own relatives, and get a wife for my son Isaac." Abraham, you remember, is the friend of God. He is the greatest of the patriarchs, and he wants to find a wife for his son Isaac. Isaac is old by this time, probably past 40. I mean, that's old, right? Past 40. And he's not been dating around. There are no prospects from among the pagans where he and his father have been living. So the servant swears to Abraham, and then he sets off for the distant land, to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, Abraham's ancestor, to find a girl for his master's son. Now, here's the third element. The agent of the eligible bachelor stops by the well. And by the way, why would he stop at a well besides to get a drink if he was thirsty? Why would he do that? Okay. Because wells is where you found the girls in those days, right? I mean, that's where the women were. They used to ask Al Capone, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is. Well, why do you go to the well? That's where the women are, right? They were the ones who carried the water for their families. This guy's looking for an eligible woman, so he goes to the village well. Verse 11, he had the camels kneel down near a well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time when the women go out to draw the water. And then you may remember the servant asked God for a sign so that he would know he was getting the right girl, the one God had picked out for his master's son. He said, Lord, I'm going to ask a girl to draw me a drink of water, and if she offers to draw what? Water from all my camels as well, then let her be the one you have chosen. Now, there'll be a lot of girls, or at least there'll be several. How will he know? He's not going to choose. God will choose. And then he'll know. God will provide the bonding event. And by the way, camels can drink a lot of water. Okay? A typical camel, after a long desert journey, can drink 50 gallons of water in less than 10 minutes. And this guy's got at least 3 camels. That's 150 gallons. Drawing 150 gallons of water from a well is a lot of work. So this guy is hedging his bets. The girl God chooses will not be afraid of hard work. She will be industrious. She will be a can-do woman. Guess what happens next? Verse 15. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. Verse 16 adds that the girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. Now it's important for us to catch that detail, even though it adds a bit of raciness to the tale. The point is, she is beautiful, she is pure, she is innocent, and it's important for us to know that. Next element. A bond is established. Verse 17. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please, give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too. And it says that the man watched her closely to learn whether the Lord had made his journey successful. He's not sure yet. He's waiting on God because he knows God will provide certainty. And then, when he is sure, do you remember what he did next? Anybody? He gave her a golden nose ring. How romantic is that? These nose rings are coming back in style if you haven't noticed. They are. And bracelets, big ones, golden ones, expensive. And then comes the excited running home to report the events. The girl ran home and told her mother's household about these things. Next, hospitality is extended. Verse 32. So the man went to the house, and the camels were unloaded. Straw and fodder were brought for the camels, and water for him and his men to wash their feet. Then they brought out the food and set it before him. But he doesn't eat, does he? Remember? He says, I won't eat a bite until I've told you why I've come, which is basically to take your daughter back with me tomorrow. Wow, this guy's fast. Even faster than my dad was. My dad took 3 weeks. This guy takes not even a day. When my kids were teenagers, their mom drilled it into their heads regularly that they were not, absolutely not ever to even think about marrying somebody they had not known for like at least a decade. And even then, not until they'd brought the prospect home for a good long parental inspection, which didn't work out exactly the way it was supposed to in real life, at least for the first two. We've still got one to go. But Colette does seem to have a pretty good sense about husbands, doesn't she? The answer to that would be, of course she does. Good sense. And then finally, the engagement is announced. Verse 50. Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son." It's a great story, isn't it? And by the way, I love the scene where Rebekah chooses to leave her family of origin. They don't give her away. They give her the choice. And with very little time to think it over, with very little time to process, her family leaves it up to her to decide whether she will go or not, and she chooses to go. She willingly leaves everything familiar. She leaves her family of origin to journey away with a stranger to become the wife of a man she has never met. She will never, ever return home again, never see her parents again, but she goes willingly and with confidence that she is in the will of God, and thereby takes her place in the line of the faithful as the mother of the line of the Messiah. Her family blessed her as she left. As they parted, they said to her, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of their enemies." And guess what? That happened. Her offspring, Jesus, possesses the gates of his enemies. Does he not? And his followers have increased to thousands upon thousands. Rebekah was a wonderful woman of courage and of faith. Anyway, it's just a real poignant scene there as Rebekah leaves home. And that's the story of her betrothal to Isaac. Rachel's is almost identical. She was not quite as faithful, but good story nonetheless. Here's the deal. If you were an Israelite or someone, if you were an Israelite and someone began to tell you a story about an unmarried man traveling to a foreign land who stopped by a well and met a pretty girl, there would be no doubt in your mind about what was going to happen next. No doubt. So, listen again to the opening of this familiar old story, but this time listen to it with Israelite ears, remembering this is how Isaac came to marry Rebekah. This is how Jacob came to marry Rachel. This is how Moses came to marry Zipporah. All as encounters between a man and a woman at a well. Jesus left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Have you got it figured out yet what kind of a story this is? This is a betrothal story. But wait, something is wrong. Jesus and a Samaritan woman? To find Jesus approached by a Samaritan woman in a betrothal type story is not just astonishing, it's terrible. But it gets worse. Because this is not just a Samaritan woman, for goodness sakes. She's not even a maiden. She's been married how many times? Count them. 5. And now she's living with some guy. Hardly the unblemished rose with whom one might expect Jesus to become engaged. No respectable Jewish man would talk to a woman like this under these circumstances, especially in public. This is an absolute scandal. And when the disciples return and find Jesus talking with this gal, they consider it to be a scandal, don't they? You know, when you are parents of children who are of dating age, what is the absolute worst case scenario choice of a mate for your kid? Or your grandkid? When our son was in college, we found out that he had, for a while, been dating a girl who was doing drugs and dealing drugs, and that her mother was a mental case, institutionalized. And when Colette and I found out, we thought, how in the world did this happen? This is the furthest thing that we had hoped for our son. Thank God they eventually broke up. I mean, we prayed for fights. We prayed for arguments between them. We prayed for all kinds of stuff. Imagine the worst case scenario for your kids or your grandkids. How would you feel? It would be a disaster, wouldn't it? But guess what? That's not how God feels. In fact, this is exactly who he wants for his son. God so loved the world that he sent his one and only son. It might have been possible to write this whole encounter off as an ignorant or a foolish mistake on Jesus' part, except for the fact that Jesus knows exactly what he's doing here. He knows exactly what kind of woman this is, and yet he persists in the scene. He asks for a drink, and then he offers her living water instead, which is the bonding event, in case you missed it. And here is where the heart of the story is revealed. Here is where we discover that it's not her lineage that binds this woman to Jesus, and it's certainly not her chastity or her purity. Here's what binds her to him: her thirst for life, for living water, for Messiah. Maybe the fact of her 5 marriages simply underscores how very deeply she was searching for wholeness and happiness, searching but never finding, unsuccessfully searching her whole unfulfilled life, until Jesus finds her, enters her life, unites himself to her through the gospel, through the water of life. He betroths himself to this thirsty, unclean girl. Because what bound Jesus to this woman was his love for her. That's why he had come there in the first place. He had to come, John says, because it's a love story. And so it was that this woman ran back to her townspeople, excited to tell about this new guy she'd met at Jacob's well. And they all came out too to meet him, only to discover that they all got the same gift that she got. Jesus was not only her salvation, he was theirs too, betrothing himself to all of them, as it were. And they beg him to come and stay with them. They extend hospitality, and he goes with them. His love embraces them all. So it's not only her story, it's their story. And you guessed it. It's not only their story, it's ours as well. That's why John tells it. His whole purpose in writing is so that we can know that Jesus has been sent from the Father to find a bride. And who did he find? He found us. He found us. He came for us. It's a good story. We have been pursued by Jesus, by Christ. And of course, it's not just about us, is it? It's about the people living around us, the ones living on our street, the ones who check us out in the grocery lines or work on our cars and haul away our trash and shop in our thrift store. You know, it's not enough just to live a very nice life and be kind and helpful and just hope that it rubs off. It's not enough. People need to know Jesus. Come and see a man, the woman tells her neighbors. Come and meet this guy, my guy. God loves them. Lost people are worth all of heaven to him. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish, but have everlasting life. And think about this. If we already know Jesus, then we get to play the part of the matchmaker. We get to be the representative, the agent, the trusted servant who goes out to find a wife for our master's son. We get to set up our friends with the blind date with Jesus. We need to remember that. We're in the matchmaking business. But we've also got to remember that it's our betrothal story too. We are the Samaritan woman. Jesus has pledged himself to us. And not because we're a really good catch either. Because we are not. Not because we are pure and lovely, but because he loves us. It said Jesus had to go through Samaria and he had to come to earth. He left his home in heaven. He journeyed to a distant country, this planet, in search of a bride, me and you. And it's not just an afterthought. This marriage of Jesus and the people he loves, he wasn't just lonely and willing to settle for whoever he could find. It was arranged in heaven a long, long time ago. God chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. That's Ephesians 1. He chose us, picked us out of the line. We are desired. He carries us on his heart. When he thinks about us, he smiles because we are his bride. And there's just something about a bride that causes a groom to smile. Something. That's the romantic truth on Valentine's Day. God chose us. He pursues us. And he would win the affections of our heart. You know, what's tough about our culture's Valentine's Day? It's all the people, for whatever reason, who don't get chosen. I remember back to my grade school days, that was back in the day, when we had the class Valentine's party every year. I remember the looks on the faces of the kids who didn't get Valentines from the cool kids, or the popular kids, or the beautiful kids. I remember the faces of the unlovely girls that none of the boys would waste a decent Valentine on, and the undesirable boys who would be mocked for sending cards to a popular girl. And when we grow up, we carry that woundedness hidden away deep inside so that we live our lives with a sense, maybe a little sense or maybe a lot, that we really don't matter much to anybody, especially in a romantic way. Maybe we feel deep down, or maybe not so deep down, that we are not lovely, and therefore we are not loved. And there are plenty of us who don't get cards or chocolates or roses or words of affirmation. Maybe we haven't for years. Some of us maybe never will. We haven't known for years the wonder and the exhilaration of being pursued and chosen, of being the fascination of a lover's interest. And so we must remember our betrothal story. We must be reminded again and again that we are loved by the most magnificent being in the universe, who has set his loving kindness upon us, and that we matter immensely to him. He knows us. He has pledged himself to us. When he thinks about us, his heart beats a little faster. When he sees us, he smiles. And that's kind of what romance is all about, isn't it? The woman at the well is our story. We are the woman, you and I, but in God's eyes, we are Rebecca, beautiful to him. So we must remember that Valentine's Day is not just for the beautiful and the lovely, it's for us. It's our day because God loves us. So, I thought to finish up this morning, we could read a few of those passages together responsively, a few of the places where God tells us that the way he thinks about us is just the way that a bridegroom thinks about his bride. And the story of your life is the story of a long and passionate pursuit of your heart by the one who knows you best and loves you most. Will you do that with me? We're going to put them on the screen. We're going to do it romantically by making it men and women, okay? Men against women. So let's hear. There's a beautiful passage in Isaiah 62 we're going to start with. You remember that Isaiah wrote it in the years before Israel went into captivity to Babylon. And with prophetic eye on the distant future, he wrote promises to God's people that God would not forsake them, that he would be faithful to restore them and bring them back to their own life, back to a faithful relationship with himself. He uses romantic imagery here, likening himself to their true lover and likening them to his truly beloved. This will be Isaiah 62, verses 3 through 5. Remember, God is speaking here, and he's speaking to us. That's why when we read it responsively, men, when we read, we are going to read the words of God to the ladies. And ladies, as you listen, you hear it as if they're the words of God to you, all right? And men, when we listen to what the ladies read, we will hear it as if God is speaking directly to us. We do that? All right, so here we go. This is Isaiah 62, and men with me. All right, here we go. Men, you will be a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, a royal diadem in the hand of your God.
No longer will they call you deserted or name your land desolate.
But you will be called Hephzibah. Oh, here it goes. But you will be called Hephzibah, which means my delight is in her, and your land Beulah, which means married.
As a young man marries a maiden, so will your builder marry you.
As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you. Isn't that a beautiful image of how God feels about us? It's wonderful. Here's the one from Zephaniah chapter 3. It's very famous. We'll start, men. Here we go. The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save.
He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love.
He will rejoice over you with singing. We'll take one more from the Old Testament, from one of the most emotionally evocative books. Hosea was a prophet that God commanded to marry a whore, basically, who would break his heart. It was to be a living illustration of the way God's people had treated him and the deep woundedness that he felt over it. It's amazing how vulnerable God makes himself in this book, and yet there are glimpses of the magnificent relationship he offered his people and that he offers to each one of us today. A promise for each of us. Here it is, Hosea chapter 2, 16 and 19 through 20. Men, in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master.
I will betroth you to me forever.
I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in justice and compassion.
I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord.
The New Testament has a number of places where betrothal language and wedding language is used. One of the most loved places is John chapter 14, the story where Jesus took his followers that night that they had the Last Supper. We don't often think of this as betrothal language, but it is, Because when a Jewish man betrothed a maiden, he spent the months before the actual wedding building a new room on his dad's house where they would live together as the honeymooning couple. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing for us now, as these verses show. The point is, Jesus feels toward us like a bridegroom feels toward his bride. So this is John 14, and the ladies will go first this time.
Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me.
In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you.
I am going there to prepare a place for you.
And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me,
that you may be also where I am.
We are loved, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Amen.
Let's sing. I found a friend. He loved me before I even knew him. I found a friend, oh, such a friend. He loved me ere I knew him. He drew me with the cords of love, and thus he bound me to him. And round my heart still closely twine those ties which naught can sever. For I am his and he is mine forever and forever. I found a friend, oh, such a friend. He bled and died to save me, and not alone the gift of life, but his own self he gave me. Not that I have my own, I call, I hold it for the giver. My heart, my strength, my life, my all are his, and his forever. I found a friend, oh, such a friend. All power to him is given. Oh, guard me on my upward course and bring me safe to heaven. Oh, aid to glory's gleam afar to nerve my faint endeavor. So now to watch, to work, to war, and then to rest forever. I found a friend, oh, such a friend, so kind and true and tender, so wise a counselor and guide, so mighty a defender. From him who loveth me so well, what power my soul can sever? Shall life or death or earth or hell, no, I am his forever.
Lord Jesus, thank you that we can take a day that is basically made popular by our world, our culture, that doesn't pay much attention to you, and realize that it's really the story of how much you love us. And thank you that you chose to pursue us, that you didn't just say, no, I'll start over again, I'll find somebody else, but you went to the mat for us, and now you come after us with offers and promise and power and love. And I pray, Lord, that we would be able in some way, as we've just sung in this song, to hold our lives for you, the giver, and to in some way express our love to you through how we live, through how we treat those around us, through the things that you've asked us to do that we can do with a joyful heart. Help us to prove our love for you. We do love you. We're looking forward to when you really come in fullness and in with your material body here to this place to take us to be with you forever. We love you in your name. Amen.